Ready or not, here comes science. They might be giants, here comes science.
Hello everybody and welcome. Today I'm really excited about our topic. It's a follow-up to a previous video I did on science education in the US where I talked a lot about assessments and learning and all that kind of thing and how the education system was essentially not good, to say the least. And what happened relatively recently was Science, the magazine, published an issue where the cover story was actually on science education, known as the Grand Challenges of Science Education, or Grand Challenges in Science Education. It contains a lot of information. They had a full editorial on it, as well as 9 review articles, or 9 articles on it, where they discussed 20 challenges that face American education in the sciences. And one of the other things they had was just sort of a brief story about a particular guy by the name of Carl Wieman, or Wieman, not really certain how to pronounce that. He is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and he is currently a big advocate for scientific education reform, and was instrumental in generating what is now known as the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS, which a lot of these articles talk about, or all of them talk about. And what Dr. Wieman was mentioning is essentially the stagnation of how children are taught, well, not necessarily children, but even adults in college and universities are taught. A big problem with this is simply that a lot of people don't care a lot about going to these lectures and sitting for an hour and listening to a professor blather on about who knows what. They don't care. And Dr. Wieman is one of the big advocates for what's known as active learning, getting the students engaged, making them think and do things and be a real part of the lecture rather than sitting there and just sort of maybe pretending to listen, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about just all of the 20 challenges as they're listed out. Instead, I'm going to talk briefly just about some of the highlights that all of these papers addressed, all these articles addressed. And first, one of the biggest questions that is posed in the entirety of this special feature is essentially, where's the problem at? Are we looking at the top or the bottom? Basically, are we looking at the teachers or are we looking at the students? Could it be how the teachers are taught to teach? And, you know, things like that. You get really inception with it, basically. But essentially what it comes down to is both need reform. And that's a big part of the NGSS. First, the biggest starting point is the quality of education in this country. And the biggest problem with that is a lot of the research funding towards education, particularly with the sciences, is focused on primary school. It's focused on like K through 5. But then middle school, high school, university, nobody cares about any of that. And what we need is we need to assess all of that and see how everything is going. We need to improve the quality across the board and see how it's doing. One of the biggest things that all of the articles mentioned was technology. We have all of this technology available to us, and what do professors use? PowerPoint. You can be doing so much more. You don't have to make a homework assignment a piece of paper that you write a bunch of essay questions on. You can make it interesting. You can do something with it. Okay? That comes down a lot more later, though. One of the other big issues that was found are individuals. How do individuals learn? More importantly, how do different individuals learn differently, and how do they perceive learning differently? This was actually a very interesting section of the articles where they looked at learning disabilities, and they saw how they looked mostly at autistic kids as well as dyslexia, mathematically disinclined, dyslexia, autism, Down syndrome, all of those, some form of learning disability. And what they did is they showed brain scans. There are specific games that are designed to help these kids in particular learn better social skills as well as help them learn and all this kind of stuff. And as part of that, it helps us understand everybody else. If we can understand the needs of these individuals, then we can sort of extrapolate that to everybody else. And we can know how important it is to really cater the learning to each individual person. Some people might enjoy going to that 50-minute lecture and sitting there and watching the professor blather around about who knows what. A lot of people don't enjoy that, though. Many, many, many more people enjoy that active learning style. But one of the most important parts is that you really need to have the pacing for each individual person. And that can be done very, very efficiently with online learning tools or any digital learning tools. Okay? It's really cool. One of the other aspects that some of the articles covered was really engagement of the students in the process, in the science. And right now, you don't really get a lot of that until high school or even college when you start doing labs. And once you start doing labs, then you can start really seeing where things are being applied, where things become applicable to your life and other sciences and all of that kind of thing. And one of the biggest things that's being advocated now are actually virtual labs, where you have a database that's stored on a server somewhere that has a whole bunch of data on it that you can then use to run virtual experiments. A couple of examples that they gave in the articles were one that was a light-based lab, where you have a light source and then you have maybe a prism or something like that, and you can determine how the light would reflect or refract. And you also had something where you could put an object in the way of the beam, and you can determine how the shadow would look. How big would it be, depending on how big the object is and where the light's coming from, all of that kind of stuff. It was really, really interesting. And the other example they gave was actually a study with car collisions and airbags. How does the height and the weight and the velocity and the type and the speed of the airbag deploying even affect a crash? And you can put in all of those variables, you can run these simulations, and then you can compare them to one another. That kind of stuff would be really interesting, I think at least, and I know a good number of students could really potentially get behind that. That being said, there were also plenty of advocates for keeping physical labs as well. You still need chemistry labs, physics labs, biology labs, all of that good stuff. That's still good. A lot of what's being discussed now is the balance between the two. And not only that, but helping the teachers. The teachers are the ones who really have to determine what's best for the students. Again, going back to those individual needs. And potentially, maybe, you can have more students doing physical labs and more students over here that are doing more virtual-based experiments. And that could potentially work for the two groups. And you can potentially synthesize all of the data together. It's a ways off, but that's the whole point of this NGSS, is that it's things that we're planning, we're working towards. Still very cool. On that note of teachers, we have to figure out a lot about our teachers. One of the phrases that they threw around a lot in the articles is professional development, or PD, as it was always abbreviated. Essentially, teaching the teachers, like I said before. The teachers need to learn about all of this stuff. If a teacher doesn't know how to cater to an individual student's needs, they won't be able to. It just won't be possible. Maybe they can, just on their own and having the intuition to be able to do it, but if we include it as part of these professional development programs, then we could really, really step all of that up. And not only that, but there are multiple different programs of this type. What makes the good ones good? What makes the bad ones bad? We don't really know. There's not a lot of information on that. And not only that, but a lot of these programs are still using really old curricula. We've got technology, we've got social media, we've got all of these different things that can potentially be used in the classroom very effectively. And I know for a fact that many, pretty much all, at least high school and college students, probably even middle school at this point, would much prefer to go and do their homework on Facebook somehow than having to open a book, That doesn't mean you're not actually learning something, though. You can still learn a great deal by doing that kind of thing. Not only that, but if you're talking about social media and all this kind of thing, then you potentially have a lot easier access to being able to ask your teacher questions. If you're stuck on a problem for your homework, you don't have to wait till the next day or 2 days from now to see your teacher again to figure out what's wrong. You can ask them potentially that night, and maybe teachers can have school-specific Facebook accounts or something like that. I don't know. I think that would be cool, and I think it would be really effective for the students because it's something that they're already used to, and it's just sort of tacking it on. I think it would be great. So do the articles. That's why they talked about it. So, one of the other big issues is the students. Because again, top down, down up, however you want to look at it. A lot of students don't care a great deal about science. There are very few students who go to college or even go into high school knowing that they want to be in a scientific field. A lot of people don't know, but then again, a lot of people can tend to be, I'm going to do anything except science. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And one of the facts is that regardless, no matter what you end up doing, at some point, you will use science in your life. You may not know it, but you will. One of the biggest things that one of the articles at least advocated very strongly was we have to make sure that these students understand how they'll be able to use science, regardless of what they do. You don't necessarily, like, let's say you're a landscaper. I don't know, whatever it happens to be. You don't necessarily have to know about biology and astronomy and chemistry. You don't have to know about everything, but it would be good if you knew a little bit about agronomy. You can know about plant biology, not necessarily animal biology, maybe even a little bit about insects. You can know a lot of different things. Or take, I don't know, textiles. You know, silk comes from silkworms. I don't know if that would be useful. Maybe it is. There's a lot of different ways that science can be useful, and the way that this article was talking about is that what we need to be able to do is to tell students, this is what's going to be important for what you want to do, and here's how you'll be able to apply it. We really need to be able to do that, and we also need to build the interest in being able to use that, and knowing that having a scientific mind, being able to think through that scientific process, can really help you no matter what the situation, even if you are not doing the hard and fast science. It doesn't matter. It's still a good process to go through. So, the next thing that was discussed was business integration as well as research. So businesses want the students. This really goes a little bit back to connecting with science and making sure that the students care as well. Businesses want their students to, or want students to know this stuff because if, say, this is Texas, we're really big into oil, Valero, all these kind of places. Valero, ExxonMobil, you know, all of the large oil companies want science students. They want geology, and they want mathematicians, engineers, all that kind of stuff. It's all good. And NGSS really aims to show kids what businesses are interested in this. It's not necessarily why they're interested, but just, hey, if you want to work for one of these companies, you better know science. The other big thing is that going bottom to top, top to bottom, whatever it is, there's the even higher level of top, 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 where, again, going back to the professional development, how are those designed? Education research. How does learning work? How does teaching work? How do students learn? All of that kind of stuff. Learning about learning, essentially. And the research, it goes a little bit back to some of the brain development and learning disabilities and things like that. But this is more just education research as a whole. Just in terms of what works, what doesn't, what do we need, what do we not need. And one of the biggest issues is a lot of education research is based on theory. Because it's based on theory, a lot of money is being spent on what's called translational theory, which just means that you've got this theory of education, and then you have to figure out how to apply it in a school. What's being advocated now is just saying, we have this problem in a school, how are we going to fix it? Rather than saying, this seems like a really cool idea, how are we going to get it into the school? It's just, we have this problem, we need to fix it, and then you can implement that much, much faster. One of the other issues is that there aren't any real good long-term studies in schools. What's being advocated by these authors was have a long-term research team in school districts of different varieties, of all different diversities. If you do that, you'll be able to see not only these problems, but how and if they change. Especially since we're trying to implement all of these new standards. We have to be able to track them, see how they're doing. And going back a little bit to the theory aspect, we need to have these in context of schools. A lot of these things are done similar to focus groups, where you have a bunch of kids in a room and say, if you saw this on a test, what would you think? You don't want that. What you want is to be in an actual school doing an actual experiment, something like that. It is being done a little bit with classroom experiments, but we need to move much, much, much more towards that. And last, but certainly not least, is my personal favorite, because it's one of the things that I am exceedingly annoyed about with science education in the U.S., and that is assessment, testing. How do we know our kids are learning? How do they show that they're learning? And how do we give them a grade in the end? That's what it's all about, right? Not necessarily. It shouldn't be. What needs to happen is we need more effective assessments. What do we have now? We have DNA is A, nucleic acid, B, protein, C, carbohydrate, D, none of the above. It's a random fact. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference whether you know what DNA is or not. What matters is what happens. What does it do? How does it work? If you know that, then that's what the science is. It's not memorizing a bunch of random facts. Facts aren't bad. It's just knowing what to do with them is what matters. Being able to synthesize new questions from already known information is what science is all about. And that's what these new assessments are trying to get, which I'm very, very excited about. They're trying to do a lot more integration, critical thinking, concepts, core ideas, all of that kind of stuff. Practice, like laboratory verifications, the virtual and the physical labs again, all that kind of stuff integrated into the assessment a lot more. Not only just random tests, but standardized testing, like what we've got here, the STAAR tests now. We want to integrate all of those things, make it much, much better. And one of the issues with the assessment and with these new standards, the NGSS, is that it makes some assumptions. It's assuming that students will have a certain proficiency over time as you go from elementary to middle to high school to college. Okay? And what needs to be done is that data needs to be tested. Those assumptions need to be tested. The problem is that it hasn't been done yet because these are brand new ideas. This NGSS is just relatively recently coming out. So those need to be done before anything really drastic happens. And one of the biggest things, like I said, is we need much more efficient and integrated assessments. Not just 3 tests over the course of a semester. We need constant quizzes, tests, all this kind of stuff. Laboratory testing as well. Lab trials, whatever you want to call it. Homework doesn't necessarily do it. It might, but not necessarily. Or maybe take away tests altogether and just have a bunch of weekly quizzes or whatever you want to call them. Just something that lets you really assess what's going on and figure it out to a greater extent than what we're able to now. One of the ways that's being investigated to do this, again, is with technology. If you have kids going home almost every day, or every day preferably, and they have something that they need to do, some critical thinking question they have to answer, something where they have to synthesize their own ideas and try to figure out what's going on, that's what we need. one of the best parts of a lot of this technology stuff is that teachers don't necessarily have to be a part of it aside from assigning it. A lot of these tech integrated questions can be graded by computers. Obviously, you have a teacher go over it just to make sure that it's all correct and good. But this is something that we use at my school as well. We have online-based quizzes, and after you take it, then it comes to me. I have to grade it, but the multiple choice stuff is graded very simply, and then I just have to look at the short answer aspect. Something like that would be great, and it would really help the teachers as well. They wouldn't have to worry nearly as much about doing a lot of this essentially busy work for them, and they could focus more on ensuring that these students are learning and able to actually apply the facts that they are memorizing rather than simply memorizing them. I think it's great. So that's it for me talking about this next generation science standards that I'm super excited about. And once again, came out in Science. This was from the week of April 13th of this year. This is 2013. And it's a great read. I've posted the links to some of the articles in the description if you'd like to take a harder look at them. And other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you learned something. And I will see you next time.
Below the store, saw a vision in his head, a bulbous pointed form. Picked his pencil up and he wrote his secret down. Just pick a point called T in the complex plane. Let C1 be Z squared plus C. Z2 is Z1 squared plus C. Z3 is Z2 squared plus C. And so on. If the series of C's will always stay close to Z and never trend away, that point is in the Mandelbrot set. Mandelbrot set, your Rorschach test on fire.